At 66, after 4 decades hemming pants and quilting spreads out of a row house in West Baltimore, I never imagined I would hear my future daughter-in-law rejoice that I had missed my own son's wedding ceremony, as if my presence were something troublesome finally avoided. The morning of Miles's wedding, I woke before the sun the same way I'd risen since Darryl, my husband, passed in an electrical accident when Miles was 8. I brewed chicory coffee the way my mother taught me, pressed the sea green dress I had saved for all spring, and laid out the gift I'd worked on at night while television murmured to an empty room. A hand-stitched quilt with the couple's initials hidden in the winding vines. 2 months of tiny stitches, 2 months of sore fingers, and all I could think was how delighted my boy would be to tuck a part of me over his new life. Baltimore had other plans. A freight truck jackknifed on I-83 before dawn. Police closed the ramps, and within minutes the city turned into a maze of horns and reroutes. The church for the ceremony sat on a hill in Bolton Hill, but the driver I finally flagged near Druid Hill Park shook his head at the barricades. We crawled through side streets I'd never seen, though I've lived here my whole life, past row houses wearing murals and windowsill saints, past boys wheeling their bikes, past the familiar smells of old bread and exhaust that always remind me who I am. By the time the taxi dropped me on the corner beneath a maple tree and I hustled up the church steps in my low heels, bridesmaids were already lifting bouquets for photos. The organ had fallen silent. Bells were ringing, but not the kind that call a congregation to its feet. These were the bells that suggest it's done, signed, sealed, and the limousine is about to roll. I swallowed whatever rose in my throat, straightened the sea green dress, dabbed my cheeks with tissue, and went to find the reception hall. A younger attendant gestured toward the courtyard, and I wandered that way, quilt in my bag, palms sweating. That's when I heard Taryn's voice float from behind a hedge of hydrangea, light and sweet and careless in the way of very young people who forget wind carries words. "Honestly," she said to 2 friends whose laughter clinked like glass, "it's better she didn't make the ceremony. You know how Lorraine gets, always talking about scrubbing floors and raising Miles alone, always telling those stories that make everyone sad. She would have cried the whole time and made it about her." One friend murmured, "Mothers-in-law, whew, blessings and burdens." They all laughed, pretty little chorus, and someone added, "At least she puts effort in, I guess. Did you see that dress at the rehearsal? From a consignment store. She's sweet, but, you know." More laughter, cooler this time, like wind. I stood frozen, half hidden behind the hydrangea, clutching the handles of my tote so tight my knuckles ached. My sea green dress was not from a consignment store, though there would have been nothing wrong if it was. It was a splurge I had made by taking extra seam work this spring. Their words hit me not like bullets, but like fine grit in the eye, irritating, indefensible, and impossible to ignore. But I have spent a lifetime learning how to ride out storms without showing my fear. I smoothed my dress, fixed my smile to the polite kind that never spooks anyone, and walked around the hedge into the courtyard as if gladness had called me there. "Mama," Miles called, as if the wind itself carried me to me. My boy, my tall, broad-shouldered boy in a charcoal suit that made him look like someone I admired from the outside, broke away from the cluster of groomsmen and hugged me. He smelt like cedar wood and aftershave. That first breath steadied me. I thought something happened. Traffic? "Shut down on the expressway," I said, patting my back, pretending calm so he could keep his joy. I wouldn't have missed it on purpose. Taryn glided over with her bouquet, face arranged in a gleam. "Lorraine, so glad you're here. The ceremony was perfect, everything right on time, but we still have the entire reception together, so nothing to be upset about." She pecked my cheek, and I saw it then, the tiniest exhale of relief that I had not been in their photographs or their vows. That exhale, more than the words by the hedge, nicked me where the skin is thin. Inside the hall near Mount Vernon Place, light spilled through tall windows like honey. A string quartet played At Last. The tables were draped in linen the color of cream. People I didn't know very well, co-workers of miles from the bank, neighbors from Terrence Parent Street near Guilford, tilted their heads politely when I was introduced and then drifted away, the way you do in a river when the current pushes stronger than your intention. I found my seat with a small group of Terren's relatives, and we traded kind phrases about the centerpieces and the crab cakes, safe conversation that never risks stepping onto anything tender. My quilt, wrapped in brown paper and blue ribbon, sat among the pile of gifts. The DJ lifted the volume. Someone clinked a glass, and Terren's father gave a speech that was funny at all the right places. When it was time for them to open a few presents for the photos, they oohed and ahed over an espresso machine from her parents and a set of crystal flutes from a boss. When Miles lifted my package, I leaned forward before I could stop myself, feeling foolish for wanting to watch. He untied the ribbon and slipped the paper off like I taught him, save what can be reused. Terren unfolded a corner of the quilt, smiled quick and pretty, and said, "Thank you, Lorraine. This is so meaningful." Then she folded it again and set it under the table with the smaller things, the phrase sliding over my skin like ice. Through dinner, conversation at our table roamed from Terren's cousin's internship in D.C. to new restaurants near the harbor to European honeymoon itineraries. When someone asked what I do, I offered the true answer. I sew for folks on our block and for a few little boutiques that like my handwork. You could feel the table smile tighten like shoes a half size too small. "How nice," said a lady in a silk blouse, and then she turned to ask if anyone had done the wine tour in Virginia. I chewed my chicken and reminded myself 1,000 times, you didn't come to be adored. You came to bless your son's joy, even if that blessing asks you to stand alone in a room full of laughter. I kept waiting for Miles to tug me up when the DJ spun some old soul classic the way he always did at cousins' birthdays. Instead, he and Terren were swept into a whirlpool of friends. He looked happy, so happy he didn't notice me lift my purse and step into the hallway at 11. I found him near the dessert table, kissed his cheek, and told him I was heading out. "Already?" he said, but he glanced over my shoulder toward a circle of friends calling him. "Okay, Mama. Thank you for coming. Love you." And then he was gone again into the bright center of their night. The taxi home slid down Charles Street, where the old row houses lean like old men in conversation. I folded my hands in my lap and tried to swallow the ache. An ache not of jealousy, not of anger, but of something quieter and harder to admit. It felt like standing on a sidewalk, watching the bus that used to stop for you pull away without glancing. I replayed the words behind the hydrangea, turned them in my mouth like a bitter lemon pit, and told myself it had been a long day for everyone. People say things when they're tired. People say things when they are trying to keep their fancy life neat. Back home in my kitchen with its peach-painted cabinets and the square table Daryl built, I hung my dress on the back of a chair and looked into the mirror over the sink. For the first time in years, I didn't just see a seamstress and a widow and a mother. I saw a woman who had traded every good dress she might have bought for school shoes and clarinet rentals. I saw hands the color of walnut and lined with needle pricks. I saw hair shot through with gray that I have never been ashamed of. And I saw the woolly outline of a truth I had been too busy to bring into focus,
My son's life had stepped into a room where I was not expected to stand.
The next morning, I didn't turn the television on. I sat in the quiet and let memory do what it always does after big days. String a line through years and pull up what you think you lost. The year Miles was 10 and asked for a science kit for Christmas when all I had was $32. The way Daryl used to eat dinner in the basement after a long shift because he didn't want us to see the grime on his hands, days before the accident. The afternoons I taught Miles how to fold shirts in 3 moves because little skills make men independent. The first time he brought Taryn by the house, the way she hugged me at the door and then wrinkled her nose at the smell of fried fish I'd made because it was Friday and some habits stick even when you stop going to church every single week. A week passed. I did an experiment I don't recommend to sentimental people. I did not text him good morning, did not send the gospel song link I thought he'd like, did not ask about honeymoon photos. On day 8, he called. "Hey, Ma, can you embroider my initials on a few dress shirts? Company event next week." He didn't say, "How are you?" He didn't ask if I made it home safe that wedding night. It was not cruelty. It was something else. Habit. Drift. The way a river finds a new channel and forgets the stones it used to kiss. I said yes. Then, while my hands did what they'd always do, needle in, needle out, thread pulled through stubborn cotton, I did something my heart had not done in a long time. I planned without him. Not revenge, not a speech I'd unleash like thunder. I planned a life with my name on it. Not a life against anyone, a life for me. One by one, the signs I had ignored clarified like a photograph in a tray of developer. The Sunday dinners Taryn posted from her parents' house, where a long table gleamed with candles, and there was a seat I was never asked to fill. The office holiday party, where spouses and special family were invited, and I heard about it after the fact. The way introductions at the reception had felt like deflections. "This is Miles's mom, Lorraine. She sews beautiful things." Then a pivot to someone shinier. 2 weeks later, the phone lit with Taryn's name. "Lorraine, my mom wants to host a little ladies' lunch. Me, her, Aunt Joyce, you. Saturday?" It sounded like a bandage being slapped on something superficial and sore. "Thank you for thinking of me," I said. "I've got plans Saturday, but another time." "Oh." Silence, then brightness. "Sure, we'll find another day." Plans, I realized, didn't need explanation. Plans could be as simple as deciding I deserved a day to myself. 3 days after, my sister Eva from Wilmington called.
When are you coming to see me and let me feed you right? I'm not getting any younger, and we haven't seen each other since Christmas before the pandemic. I said the first thing that came from my new part of me. Next month, and I might stay a week or two. You good with that? Her laugh traveled 50 miles and landed warm in my kitchen. Baby, I'll make the room pretty and the pot of beans big. That same afternoon, I walked to the community center on Pennsylvania Avenue, where I'd sewn costumes for children's plays years back. The flyer on the corkboard said, "Intro to Computers for Adults, no experience needed." I took a pen from my purse, wrote my name where names go, and went to the desk to pay. The young woman looked up at me with that mixture of impatience and kindness the very young have. "Do you want to try out first?" "No, baby," I said. "I want to start." The tiny revolutions continued like beads sliding down a string. At the bank, I opened a second savings account in my name alone, called For Joy. And the teller smiled like she was on a secret. At the discount store, I bought 2 blouses the color of hibiscus because they made me happy when I held them to my face, not because they fit someone else's idea of a mother's age. I put away the extra chairs I always kept around the kitchen table in case folks stopped by, and set the table just for me with the blue plate Daryl bought me on a day we'd argued and then made it right.
When the computer class began, I showed up with a spiral notebook, a pencil, and the patience I've developed from decades of untying knots. There, I met a small circle of women who have since stitched themselves into the hem of my days. Miss Janet, who had lost her husband and found her singing voice. Mrs. Polk, who wanted to learn email so she could write to a niece in the service. And Gloria, who kept saying, "I thought it was too late, but maybe it's not." The instructor taught us how to turn the machines on, how to make the arrow do what we wanted, how not to be afraid of clicking something wrong. Every time the screen did what I asked, a little window opened inside me where tiredness used to sit. That Saturday, Taryn texted again. "Are you sure you can't make brunch? My mom would really like to get to know you better." I looked at the new hibiscus blouse laid out on my bed and said the truest thing. "I'm sure. Another time." On Sunday, Miles called. "Ma, Taryn says you're busy all the time now. Everything okay?" "Everything is fine. I've got computer class, and I'm planning a trip to see Aunt Eva." "A trip?" Surprise laced his voice. Surprise that I might leave a city without alerting committee members. "Yes," I said, and waited for silence to do its work. "I'll be gone as long as I like." For most of my life, I have been an always person, always available, always understanding, always adjusting, always saying, "Sure, baby," even when my bones cried, "Please, no." I didn't blame Miles for expecting that version of me. I trained him to expect her. So when he stumbled over the new shape of me, I spoke soft, but kept the shape. Sometime in the 3rd week after the wedding, he came by without Taryn and sat on our old avocado green couch,
the one he used to flip over to turn into a fortress. "Mom, can we talk?" I turned the kettle on and faced him the way I faced job interviews and bill collectors. Chin up, spirit down to the knees so it can't be yanked out. "We can." He looked handsome and serious, grown in all the ways I prayed he would be. "Taryn and I are trying to set a rhythm. We want to start a family in a couple years. There are certain expectations with her parents' circle." He cleared his throat. "Maybe it would be easier if you came to smaller things, just us, rather than big events with her people. You know, less chance of misunderstandings." There it was, plain, still so gentle it almost passed as kindness. Misunderstandings like the fact that I talk about where I come from? Misunderstandings like the reality that I don't have a country club story to offer at brunch? He winced. "It's not like that." "What is it like?" I asked, careful to keep my voice as mild as tea so I didn't give him something easy to fight. He rubbed his hands together. "We don't want people to have the wrong impression about our situation. Sometimes when you talk about the hard years, it makes people think I'm from hard years," I finished, and felt the floor of my heart hold me up like a pew. "Which you are, which we are. That's nothing to be ashamed of." "I'm not ashamed," he said too fast. "I'm just trying to protect Taryn from judgment." I could have talked then about the 1,000 ways protection gets twisted into control. I could have reminded him who taught him to hold his head in rooms where nobody knew his name. Instead, I did what I had promised myself I would do when this moment came. I protected my peace. "Okay," I said, "we'll do smaller things for a while." Relief eased his face, and for a second I saw my boy at 8, when the spelling bee judge said his words slowly and he mouthed it to make sure. He hugged me, grateful to have solved the problem I represented. After he left, I sat with a cup of tea I didn't drink and let the quiet say what it knew. A boundary had been set around me without my consent. It would have been easy to rage, easy to call my sister and wash my grief in words. But the class at the community center had taught me something unexpected. When you learn to move the cursor on purpose, the machine obeys. When you learn to move your life on purpose, your soul obeys too. I chose then to move it toward me.
The next morning, I made a list on the back of a grocery receipt. Things I wanted that did not require permission. Learn email. Find a walking path I like. Take the MARC train to DC one day, just to walk a museum. Sew something for the sheer joy of stitching, with no one's initials hidden in the edges. Call Eva and set the dates for my visit. Make my own calendar and fill it with my name. I did not stop loving my son a single ounce. I did not stop praying over his head at night the way I always have. Dear God, keep my child in your sight when he's not in mine. I just took my heart off the hook I had hung it on and started wearing it again like something I own. 2 Fridays later, I stood at Penn Station with a tote bag and 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the way my mother sent me into the world.
Eva waved from the other end of the platform, eyes shining the way sisters have shined at me since I was a girl. "You better stay long, or I'm locking your bag in my closet." In Wilmington, we walked by the Brandywine and ate corn pudding at a diner Eva loves. We turned the television off at night and told each other the kind of stories only sisters are entitled to. Who we loved, who we lost, what we kept hidden. And when I said, "I think I've been trying to stay small so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable," she put her hand on mine and said, "Well, stop. Be regular-sized. They'll adjust." The second evening, as the sun sank over brick streets, Miles called. "When are you coming back? Taryn wants to plan a dinner." "I don't know," I said, letting the soft air hold me up. "I bought an open return." "An open?" He swallowed newness. "Okay, just let me know." I promised I would. And because love doesn't require explanations for joy, I didn't offer any. I stayed 2 weeks. The world did not tilt. Nothing caught fire. When I came home to Baltimore, my plants were thirsty but alive. On my first day back, I found a message on my machine from the community center instructor. "Miss Carter, would you consider helping out as a volunteer for the next session? You have a calm way of explaining. The ladies look to you." I sat with the receiver in my hand and felt the strangest sensation. It was recognition. Not the kind that comes from a child's gratitude, the kind that comes from being a person with skills people need. The next Saturday, I went with 2 classmates from computer class to a little art market near Station North, where vendors sell jewelry and bowls made from wood felled in last winter's storm. Someone had hung quilts along a fence, and a man there asked me about my stitching. By the time I left, I'd agreed to bring 3 pieces the following month to sell on consignment. I walked home along North Avenue in my hibiscus blouse and laughed out loud at nothing in particular except the wild relief of having finally put my own name on my calendar. By the time I sat down to embroider that night, I realized something I would have sworn could never be true. The quiet was not lonely. It was spacious, like a room finally cleared of boxes. The first Sunday after I began volunteering at the computer class, I woke before my alarm, brewed coffee, and walked to the center with a spring in my step I hadn't felt since Daryl was alive, and we were young enough to think grit could outrun grief. The ladies waved when I came in, Mrs. Polk in her floral dress, Gloria in a denim jacket with patches, Janet with her red lipstick that says present. We practiced attaching files to emails, and when something wouldn't behave, I saw my own old fear in the flinch of their shoulders. "Don't be afraid of the machine," I said. "You are the boss. Tell it what you want, twice, 3 times, and then try again." Their laughter made a warm sound, and I thought, look at you, Lorraine, making sense out of blinking cursors, making space. The center director pulled me aside afterward. "Ever consider teaching a Saturday workshop, Miss Carter? Traditional hand-stitch techniques? We've got a waiting list, and folks trust you." Pay wasn't much, but it wasn't about the pay. It was the yes inside me that rose like bread and made everything smell like possibility. I told him I would, and on my way home, I bought a bouquet of small sunflowers with my for joy money and set them in a mason jar on my table, because grown women deserve flowers, even if nobody else thinks to bring them. Taryn texted that afternoon, "Family dinner Friday? My parents want to hear about your trip." The old reflex to rearrange myself to fit their calendar twitched. I let it pass like a hiccup. "Can't Friday," I wrote. "Teaching Saturday morning. Sunday would work." She answered, "Okay," with a series of cheerful hearts that meant she was trying in her way. On Friday night, I treated myself to fried oysters at a place near the harbor where the servers are kind to women eating alone. I watched a couple take wedding photos on the pier, the bride lifting her dress hem to keep it out of puddles, and I thought about the ways we keep the fabric of our lives clean for other people's eyes. I ate my oysters slowly and didn't rush because no one needed me at home. It was not loneliness, it was wide air. Sunday dinner at Terrence's parents' house had always made me feel like a visitor in a museum. Everything delicate, everyone polite, certain topics velvet roped off. This time, when I walked in holding a peach cobbler, I felt different inside my own skin. Terrence's mother met me at the door with a brisk kiss. "Lorraine, that dress, such a bright color." It was the hibiscus blouse, ironed crisp, and matched with a skirt I'd taken in myself because the brand never bothers to cut generously for hips like mine. I smiled and said thank you, like a woman who knows exactly what she is wearing. At the table, the conversation once again floated toward investment portfolios and trips. But when there was a lull, Terrence's father asked me directly, "And you, Lorraine, what have you been up to besides keeping all of us looking sharp with your stitching?" Usually I would downplay. This time I told the simple truth. I've been learning computers at the community center and teaching a hand-stitching workshop there next month. And I just set up a consignment with a market near Station North. It keeps me out of trouble. I meant it as a light line, but the look that passed between Taryn and Miles was not about trouble. It was about surprise and, if I'm honest, a little pride. "What kind of quilting do you do?" Taryn's mother asked, real curiosity softening her tone. "Pieces with meaning," I said. "I like hiding names in the pattern. When families wrap themselves in it, they're wrapped in their story. That matters to me." After dessert, Miles walked me to my car. The night smelled like basil crushed in someone's garden and the faint metallic tang the harbor breathes. "Mama," he said shyly, "I'm proud of you." I touched his cheek as if he were still a boy. "Thank you." He couldn't leave it there. He never has been able to. "Taryn told me you turned down brunch twice. I didn't know you'd be so busy." "I didn't know either," I said. "Turns out there are a lot of hours in a week when you stop giving all of them away." He winced, and I softened it with a smile. "I'm not punishing anybody. I'm practicing living." He nodded as if trying on that sentence. Practicing living. It fit him when he repeated it. In the weeks that followed, my days took on a rhythm made of small satisfactions. Mornings in the park, where a white-haired man on a bench taught me the names of the birds. Afternoons bent over linen while the radio murmured old soul. Evenings where I'd call Eva and we'd compare what we cooked. Her, smothered pork chops. Me, black-eyed peas with tomato. I sold my first quilt at the market to a young couple saving for an apartment. And when the vendor handed me the money, I slipped 2 bills into the ForJoy jar and 2 bills into a new jar I labeled Someday Train.
I didn't keep a scorecard of how often I saw my son. That's a fast path to bitterness. What I kept instead was a short list of the moments that told me our shape had changed for the better. The day he called just to tell me a story about a client who reminded him of his granddad. The morning Taryn texted me a photo of a crooked hem and asked how to fix it herself instead of pressing a bag toward me with, "Could you just?" The evening they showed up with dinner unannounced and washed the dishes without looking for gold stars. Then came the call that would have shoved the old Lorraine into shape like wet laundry under a bed. "Ma," Miles said, "can you watch Simone's kids Saturday? They've got tickets to a concert." He sounded sheepish already. He knew I had stopped being default. "I've got workshop all morning and market in the afternoon," I said, "but I can do Sunday after church if they want a movie date." "Sunday won't work for them." "I hope they have a wonderful time," I said. And there was a long pause on the line where frustration could have rushed in and set the house on fire. It didn't. It flickered, then went out. He exhaled. "Okay, Ma, I'll tell them to figure something else out." After, I made tea and sat on the stoop where evening soaks into the city like water into bread. A few years ago, I would have felt like a bad mother for not conjuring more hours out of thin air. Now, I felt like a woman whose hours were as precious as anyone else's. Love did not shrink. It loosened a little at the shoulders. It fit better. A month later, on a soft Saturday with the sycamores shedding papery bark, Miles called with a different tone in his voice, the one he uses when he has done some thinking on his own and plans to say it out loud. "Mama, can we take you somewhere tomorrow? Not just dinner. There's an artist studio near Highlandtown that does textile work. Taryn read about it. We thought you'd like it." They picked me up at 10 with coffee in a paper cup and a pastry that tasted like almonds and sunshine. The studio belonged to a man named Arturo, whose grandmother taught him backstitch at a kitchen table like mine. He had bolts of cloth stacked like a library and hung swaths of fabric like stained glass. He asked about my work and handed me a needle, and for a half hour we stood shoulder to shoulder, murmuring about widths and warp. Miles watched me the way he watches ball games, mouth slightly open, eyes tracking. Later, in the car, he said, "I didn't know people talk about quilting like that, like music." "You didn't know because you never asked," I said, and then I squeezed his knee to soften it. "Now you know." The following week, the director at the center asked if I would share a little of my story at the end of the session to encourage new ladies signing up. I told them the truth without embroidery. For years, I put my own name at the bottom of my to-do list. Then I forgot to put it on the list at all. Then, one day, my heart demanded its spot back. I said I kept waiting for my loved ones to hand me permission. In the end, I had to hand it to myself. During the applause, I saw a woman in the back cry and try to hide it. Afterward, she came up to me, shoulder shaking. "My son just got married," she whispered. "I feel like a vase someone keeps moving to a back corner. Thank you for saying it out loud." We exchanged numbers. Sometimes it is enough to know you are not the first person to navigate a hall you thought had no doors.
Late that summer, I took the Mark to D.C. to walk the museums with my someday train money. I had planned to go alone, but at the last minute, Taryn asked if she could join on her day off. "I won't be in your way," she said, like a kid. "You're not luggage," I told her. "You walk beside me or you don't come." We spent an afternoon with fabrics so old you can see the patience in them. We ate sandwiches on a bench and people watched, and out of nowhere she said, "I messed up at the wedding." Her voice was so small, I almost pretended not to hear to spare her, but honesty is a thread that mends. "What do you think you messed up?" "I thought your presence would make me work harder," she said, flushing, "to be proper, to translate, and I resented that. But really, I was scared of being seen as a girl from the good side of town marrying a boy who had to work twice as hard. I didn't have enough courage to be who I am, so I made a villain out of the woman who made the man I love." I let the city noise fill the silence that followed. "Thank you for saying that," I told her. "We get to start again all the time if we are brave enough to say the thing." Sometimes the world delivers a kindness disguised as an ordinary day. We walked 3 miles and talked about nothing terrible. We took the train home with our feet aching good. She leaned her head on my shoulder and slept a little, the way children do with people they trust. I watched the country slide by and thought, not every broken thing needs to be thrown out. Some can be stitched. Autumn came. My workshop filled up 2 sessions in a row. The market asked for more pieces than my hands could make, so I took fewer alterations from the boutiques and gave my fingers to my own designs. On Mondays, I walked with Mrs. Polk. On Wednesdays, I learned spreadsheets from Gloria's nephew. On Fridays, Eva called to read out loud the funny parts of her life and the fears that don't feel funny yet. We became women with plans rather than women waiting to be included. One Sunday in October, Miles showed up at my door with a grocery bag. "I came to make dinner and hear about your week," he said. He set onions on my cutting board and wielded a knife like a man who has watched, who has learned. While we cooked, he told me things I didn't know. Work pressure he'd never brought to me, a colleague who'd said something that made him carry his jaw tight, the way he sometimes felt guilty for wanting a big life when his mother lived small to give it to him. I stared at the flame under the pan until it steadied. Then I said, "Child, I did not live small. I lived for you until you could live for yourself. That was my joy. Now my joy is something else. We both get to be big at the same time. Imagine." He looked at me the way you look at a view you didn't know your house had. Then he said, "I'm sorry I asked you to make yourself scarce." "I know," I said. "We were all just trying to survive our own fears." He nodded. We ate standing at the counter, the best way to eat onions and peppers, in my opinion. And when he left, he tucked the quilt I made at the wedding under his arm. "We never used it," he admitted. "Taryn was scared she'd spill on it." "Spill on it?" I said. "It's not an altar cloth. It's for living." They sent me a picture that night, the 2 of them under the quilt on their small couch, her feet tucked into the wool, his hand on the seam where his initials hide. Under the photo, Taryn wrote, "We are wrapped in our story." By winter, the hustle of the wedding felt like a dream I'd once had in a night where I slept crooked. I walked into rooms with my head up, not because I demanded applause, but because I had nothing to apologize for. When someone at church asked how I've been, I didn't answer with news about Miles. I talked about my own work, my students, the way the sparrows were getting fed on the seeds I scattered. The questions people asked next were different because I was different. One cold afternoon in December, Taryn called. "I'm at your block. Can I come up?" She didn't assume the door would be open. She asked.
She stood in my kitchen with her hands around a mug of tea. "My mom," she said carefully, "has been struggling with empty nest, even though the nest isn't empty yet. I realized I've been treating her like a resource rather than a person. I'm trying to do better with you so I can do better with her and with the daughter I might have someday." We talked for 2 hours. Not all of it was comfortable. Some things we let sit on the table like a hot pan no one wanted to touch just yet. But the air in my kitchen stayed breathable because neither of us tried to prove anything beyond, "We intend good." Later that week, Taryn and Miles came by on a Tuesday just to watch a movie, something about a road trip where nothing happens and everything happens. Halfway through, the light shifted on my living room rug, and I felt gratitude so sudden it made my eyes sting. Not because they were there, because I would be okay if they weren't. That is the freedom that makes love pure rather than hungry. On the first anniversary of their wedding, they organized a dinner that felt nothing like the old museum table. They cooked in my kitchen. Taryn had learned to season a cast iron skillet properly. Miles made a salad with toasted pecans and pears, and we ate with our elbows on the table like people whose lives can withstand a mark or two. After dessert, Taryn lifted her glass. "To Lorraine," she said, "for teaching us to make space for who we are and who we're becoming all at once." I didn't make a speech. I don't do speeches in my own house. I touched the edge of my plate and felt the grain of the wood Daryl had sanded, felt the heartbeat of a life that had survived everything it took to get here. Later, they fell asleep on the couch watching a documentary about quilters of Gee's Bend, and I covered them with the wedding quilt. Yes, the one I told them to use. I tucked it around their shoulders like you do for children, like you do for adults you believe will grow up more each year. I sat a while and watched their chests rise and fall in rhythm. The city outside coughed and sang. My heart, finally, did neither. It rested. When I tell this story, women sometimes lean toward me the way you lean toward a pot bubbling low on the back burner. They ask, "What did you say that made them change?" I tell them the truth with a smile big enough to be mistaken for mischief. I changed. Not into something hard, into something clear. I stopped walking into rooms hungry. I stopped giving away my every hour before I knew what I wanted to do with it. I stitched my name into the edges of my days. And once I did, people treated those days like something that belonged to someone. A year after the wedding, I teach 2 workshops a month. I take the train wherever whim tells me without feeling like I have to justify a trip with an itinerary. I keep a new list on my refrigerator called "For Joy Next," and there is always something written on it in my shaky, careful script. Right now it says, "Learn to make bread that tastes like Sunday. Visit the beaded exhibit at the museum again. Write down the family stories before they fade." As for Miles and Taryn,
we have found our way. They still go to dinners where people talk about France as if it were a neighbor. Sometimes they invite me, and sometimes they don't. When they don't, I make soup and invite my neighbors to eat it. When they do, I decide if I want to go. If I do, I wear hibiscus and pearls. If I don't, I put on comfortable socks and sew until midnight with a good movie humming. Love is not a tally. It's a table. Pull up a chair or don't. The food will keep. If you're listening to me from a bus seat or a kitchen or a back porch where the air smells like rain, let me say it plain in case your heart needs these words the way mine needed them the day after the wedding. It isn't selfish to live a life with your name stitched on the edge. It isn't unloving to say, that day doesn't work for me. It isn't betrayal to take the train to your sister and stay as long as you like. Our children's joy is not improved by our erasure. It's deepened by our wholeness. I'm glad you were here with me. If you stayed until now, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It always warms me to imagine these words traveling farther than I ever thought I would. If the story touched you, tap like, subscribe, or send a kind word. Your encouragement helps me keep stitching new stories late into the night. On the screen, you'll find 2 more life stories I think you'll love. There's plenty more on the channel. Until next time, with love and respect.